There is a silence in history, deeper than the graves it buries. A silence not of peace, but of terror so complete, even the dead dare not speak of it. The year was 1468. The executioner was not a man, but a myth. They called him King der Glut, the king of embers, but King made it his. Inside the metal beast, a hollow cavity twisted to echo screams as the victim burned alive. The nose of the bull would emit a smoke scented with burning flesh and oils, a parody of incense. And through its mouth, a trumpet system translated the dying screams into a grotesque song like a demon's lullaby. And every actor had a script written in sinew, bone, and terror. Her method was neither fire nor blade, but glass. It was said she learned it from Venetian alchemists, and improved it with her own madness. Victims were stripped and bound within a glass box, hermetically sealed. Then, slowly, a fine sand ground from glass, salt and iron shavings, was funneled into the chamber. Others claimed she never existed, that she was the imagination of traumatized soldiers who returned from the Crusades and could not explain what they saw. But what remains undeniable is this. Cruelty is a language that transcends borders, and in the Middle Ages it was spoken fluently by nobles, priests and peasants alike. Not to crush, but to abrade. Death by infinite cuts. Secrets carved into wood, suspended by rope, and sealed in flesh. In the next chapter, we travel to France to meet a man who never once touched his victims, yet left them gasping in the snow, praying for breath that would never come. Skin, eyes, gums, everything, peeled slowly over hours, sometimes days. It was slow erosion, not execution. But even Kig, for all his artistry, was a tame poet compared to what came next. He begged not for life but to be hanged instead. She refused. When the chamber was finally opened, there was no blood, only dust, and a single tongue severed by the man himself in desperation. Isolde had it mounted in crystal, a trophy. Not for the fire he used, but for the way he kept it burning, always low, always slow. He was a craftsman of death, and his specialty was the brazen bull. In the echoing corridors of medieval justice, the law did not whisper, it screamed. And yet, in the hearts of those condemned, it was not the verdict that echoed, but the met. Watch death approach, he did not scream when they chained him inside the bull. He sang a hymn. It shook the crowd. But the bull, like time, consumed the voice. By the time his body was pulled out, a glistening skeleton, blackened and fused to metal, no one remembered the words, only the sound. A sound that lingered. Let us begin not in a castle nor a dungeon, but in the open air of a German square, where the air smelled of piss, iron, and God. It was not originally German. The bull was born in Sicily, they say, sculpted from bronze by a man who was later roasted inside it as payment. The condemned this time was Anselm Falk, a former priest turned heretic, accused of translating forbidden gospels and giving them to peasants. Yet King was not merely a torturer. He saw himself as a cleanser. He once wrote, "A pure flame leaves no shadow." He believed the soul was purged through pain, that the agony of the flesh carved a tunnel for salvation. His victims were not criminals to him. They were pilgrims. That, perhaps, is the most terrifying detail of all. Execution in the Middle Ages was not a tool of justice. It was theater. Across the sea, in a castle forgotten by maps, lay the domain of Isolde of Blackmere, a noblewoman whose cruelty was whispered through centuries like a plague reborn in stories. Isolde kept a chamber where walls shimmered with reflected pain. She called it the Crystal Womb. One prisoner, a mason named Gerhardt, tried to hold his breath for an hour to avoid the sharp dust. History forgot her birth and death date. Some say she fled to the east, taking her methods with her. We are not finished. For the medieval world held other secrets, deeper than bulls and glass. They called him Lavaller the Watcher, not because he watched his victims suffer, but because he watched them die before they ever truly died. His name was Etienne du Rouen, a physician turned punisher in the shadowy courts of France during the winter of 1314. He had once studied under the monks of Salerno, healing the dying, easing the breath of plague-stricken children, but war, famine, and betrayal had soured his soul like milk under a black sun. When the king refused to pardon his family, Etienne made a promise not to the devil, but to science. He began to experiment with air, not the air that fills the lungs, but the absence of it. No screams. The nobles praised Etienne for his mercy. They believed he spared the body. Some say he climbed inside it himself, as an act of philosophical purity. Others believe he was taken silenced by those too terrified of what he might prove. Regardless, the blueprints of his invention were lost. Except for a single sketch found in a Parisian cellar in 1821, marked with this phrase: "Silence is not the absence of sound, it is the presence of death." In total darkness, then, from all directions, the same phrase was repeated: "You are forgotten," again and again, spoken softly by hooded monks in a rhythmic chant without pause. For hours, then days, then nights, no torture, no food, no human contact. Just voices, calm, unchanging, unending. But inside that box, there were worlds of horror, unseen mental disintegration. Delusion, the quiet madness of suffocation without force. And his victims were not only destroyed, they were devoured. And in the shadowed corners of Spain, beneath stone cathedrals and hidden monasteries, a new horror was growing, one not of isolation or fire, but of sound. The monks called it the litany. It was not a device, it was an experience. Yes. Sound itself would become the blade. Etienne believed he was a philosopher. He once told a priest, "I do not punish. I reveal, I let the body speak its truth in the absence of breath." That modern man with his screens and steel would laugh at these crude methods. But ask yourself, when was the last time you sat in silence? No voices, no music, no scrolling, just your breath and your thoughts. Etienne designed what he called le berceau du vent, the cradle of wind. It was no cradle. Women tore out their own nails just to feel something. One man, a Moorish scholar named Basir, began speaking backwards. Another, a boy of 17, died smiling, repeating the phrase as if it were a prayer. When asked why they used this method, an inquisitor once wrote, "Pain breaks the body, petition breaks the soul." It was a coffin, carved of cherry wood and iron, sealed with tar and lined with mirrors. Victims were placed inside it, fully conscious, naked and hooded, with a small candle lit beneath them. Then, slowly, Etienne would close the lid, not all at once, but inch by inch, while reciting psalms in Latin, as if baptizing them into silence. Inside, the air would grow stale. The flame would dim. The lungs would begin to panic, not from pain, but from confusion. It was not death by choking. No rope, no water, just disappearance. The air became thin, the brain thick. Eyes bulged. Time slowed. Some clawed at their own faces. Others laughed as if drunk. One woman, a baroness, convicted of sorcery, began to sing lullabies from her childhood, kissing the wood until her lips bled. But Etienne never rushed. He wrote in his notes, "It is the fear of forgetting the next breath that truly destroys the soul." To the world outside, the executions were clean. No blood, no fire. Then, one winter evening, he disappeared. The cradle was found open, empty, and steaming. By now, one might believe we have reached the peak of cruelty. But cruelty, like the tide, comes in waves. The Inquisition had many tools, but there was one method so subtle, so invasive it never left a marquette. It hollowed men from within like rot in an apple. Prisoners were strapped upright, eyes open, ears unblocked. Men begged for whips. We may think we are immune to such things, that time has hardened us. Perhaps we are still trapped in our own versions of law, the torture refined. In the next chapter, we travel to Eastern Europe to meet a man who made nature itself his weapon. Not fire, not iron, not sound, but insects. There are some deaths that are swift, others are public. Some are clean, poetic even. But then there are those that do not end when the body falls still, because the body itself becomes the battlefield. Not of men, but of things smaller, things that crawl, that burrow, that feast. In the wooded borderlands between Wallachia and Moldavia, during the dead summer of 1492, a man named Casimir Wojciech held court over a dozen villages. He was not a noble by birth, but by fear. So he devised what his men called Gertva, Vitha, living sacrifice. He wore no crown, and yet even the bishops called him Domnul de Rams. Let the worms decide, he whispered. His method of execution was not taught in universities. It was born and wrought, in observation, and in the stillness of decay.
Ice.
Only a red-black sludge, and a crown of bark, where his skull had once been, kept alive by force-feeding water, for days. The body remained conscious swollen, infected, crawling. But his journals, preserved in a monastery far from that haunted forest, reveal something more terrifying. He believed his methods worked. That repentance emerged not from fear, but from witnessing one's own body betrayed by the smallest of God's creations, to a prison not of wood or steel, but of time itself, a place where the body was allowed to live long enough to forget its shape, where execution was not one act, but a series of degradations. The ultimate justice, he wrote, is being remembered by that which does not even know your name, not in pain alone, but in the presence of consumption. One woman was reported to have screamed until her own tongue was eaten out by larvae. A man clawed his own eyes, but could not escape the maggots nesting in his gums. It was not just the flesh that died, it was identity. Casimir believed that the earth itself judged the wicked, that nature, when given the right conditions, would speak its truth through decomposition, where the most brutal method of all was not fire, nor worms, nor time, but hope. Year 1, tongues were cut. Year 2, eyes burned with lime. Year 3, gloves filled with broken glass were sewn to the hands permanently. By year 4, no music or human voice was allowed near them. Year 5, they were left in a stone room filled with cold water up to the knees at all times. Year 6, they were denied sleep, pricked awake every hour. It was a ritual, performed not in a day, but over 7 years. Began with a hollowed-out tree, its core carved smooth with resin. Into this wooden coffin, the victim was placed upright, naked, limbs punctured but not severed, so blood would ooze but not gush. The prison was eventually abandoned, but the mirrors remained. When Coldstone Keep was turned into a museum, visitors reported strange reflectionsmen who blinked out of sync, or faces that changed when you turned away. Then Casimir would pour a warm paste of honey, goat's milk, and fermented barley over the body, coating every orifice, every wound. When a man no longer believes he exists, he said, he is free to die. The scent summoned flies first, then hornets, then ants, then worse. They were sealed in not with nails, but with rope and time. Casimir recorded these deaths meticulously. He considered himself a servant of balance. He claimed that every man must return to the womb of the forest, not in silence but in surrender. His garden of punishment lay beneath a canopy of whispering trees, each one hollowed, each one echoing with the scratching of what was still alive, or what had just died. At night, the forest buzzed not with bird song, but the wet music of decay. But Casimir did not escape his own philosophy. When a rival warlord captured him, they offered him the sword. He refused, begged for the tree. They granted his wish. A year later, when the tree was opened, they found no bones. It would be easy to dismiss Casimir as mad, but he was not the last, nor the worst. Let us go west to England, at Coldstone Keep. Under the rule of Warden Elias Graft, prisoners were subjected to what was called the 7 unbindings. Each year, one liberty was removed: speech, sight, touch, sound, warmth, rest, and finally, identity. And in year 7, they were given back a mirror. Those who looked did not recognize what stared back, and that Warden Graft believed was the true execution. Only 13 ever survived the 7 years. Not one could speak. Not one could walk properly. Their names were lost.
Their pasts
erased. And so we come to a terrible truth. Execution was never about death. It was about control, of memory, of identity, of meaning. In our final chapter, we descend one last time into a city buried beneath ash and silence. There are legends buried deeper than bones. Stories so cruel, so meticulously human, they are whispered not with fear but with reverence. Because the greatest agony is not fire or isolation or pain. It is hope, the flickering belief that escape is possible, that someone might come, that the door will open, that mercy might exist, and that perhaps you deserve it. Our final story takes place not in the light of gallows or the darkness of dungeons, but underground, beneath the ruined city of In, what is now southern Poland. A network of tunnels carved long before the plague years, once used for trade and later war. The idea that true atonement must be chosen, not inflicted. So they created a system, a punishment cloaked as opportunity. When a crime was deemed too grave for death, yet too sacred for forgiveness, the condemned were offered a single choice: enter the vault and walk toward the light. But in the cold breath of the 13th century, those tunnels became something else, something no map records and no saint could sanctify. They became the vaults of redemption. That hope itself, the most sacred human instinct, was twisted into a weapon. Her voice was heard sobbing through the walls, begging her dead mother to show her the right door. The monks listening above said she began reciting recipes: bread, stew, pies. She died in chamber 9, curled in a fetal position, clutching a stone as if it were a child. The ruling family house Kosielny were known not for their cruelty, but for their obsession with penance. When the Kosielny line fell to plague, the tunnels were sealed. Only a few maps remains, scribbled with warnings: do not listen, do not trust the light. That at the final chamber, a narrow stairway opened into a chapel lit with a single candle. And the condemned would emerge, reborn, pardoned of all crimes, freed by their own endurance. The vault was a maze of 12 chambers, each one darker than the last. Bit by bit, piece by piece, till nothing remained that could still call itself human, not by demons, but by people, scholars, judges, saints, mothers, artists, until the body, the mind, the name, the face were all shattered reflections in a blackened mirror. One survivor wrote in blood on a stone, "It is not the maze that kills you, it is the belief that there is an end." They were rituals, designed not only to end a life, but to etch fear into the hearts of those who watched. To say, this is what happens when you disobey the shape of the world. But within each chamber, a door existed, always locked, except for one. Only one door would open and lead to the next room. As the others, traps. Some led to pits. Others triggered crushing walls. One, it is said, contained a mirror that never reflected you, only what you feared most. Do you truly believe humanity has left all this behind? And always, there was the voice soft, genderless, echoing from above. Keep walking. Redemption is near. No food, no light. No map, just the whisper, and always that flicker of hope. Some rooms would remain silent for days. Others would scream lullabies in reverse. Time bent. Hunger blurred the mind. Historians debate whether anyone ever truly escaped. Kosielny claimed 7 souls reached the end over 200 years. But skeptics believe there was never an exit, that the final chamber simply collapsed, or looped, that the promise was the punishment. A girl named Ludmila, a baker's daughter accused of poisoning a nobleman, was recorded as having lasted 72 days. And so the vault became legend. Yet something deeper echoes in these stories. Throughout medieval history, execution was not the removal of life, it was the stripping of self. Whether through fire, air, silence, insects, or hope, these methods were not mere punishments. But perhaps the cruelest part of all is that these methods were devised not by monsters, each believing, in their own way, that they were doing what was just. Now, as you sit safe, warm, ask yourself, in your quietest moments, or are we simply more efficient now? The methods have changed, the hunger has not. And that, dear listener, may be the darkest execution of all.